The emergency alarms blared through the Galactic Council's central chamber, a sound that hadn't been heard in over 30 cycles. Ambassador Vrel practically threw himself into his seat, his three-eye stalks swiveling frantically as the massive view screen flickered to life. Around him, representatives from 200 different worlds scrambled to their positions, confused whispers echoing through the vast hall. "What's happening?" demanded the Carillion delegate, her scales rippling with anxiety. "It's the humans," Vrel announced, his voice trembling. "They've landed on Kroth 7. The chamber went dead silent. Even the translator devices seemed to pause. Kroth 7 wasn't just any planet. It was the Forbidden World, the graveyard of civilizations, home to the most efficient killers the galaxy had ever catalogued. On the main screen, grainy footage showed a small human research vessel touching down on a landscape of black volcanic rock and crimson sand. The ship looked ridiculously fragile, like a tin can that someone had painted white and slapped a few rockets on. 3 humans emerged from the landing ramp, wearing nothing but basic environmental suits and carrying scientific equipment. "They're not even armed," someone gasped from the back rows. Dr. Tyler Banks led the group, his brown hair already messy from the helmet he'd just removed. Behind him came his colleague, Dr. Amy Chin, and their security advisor, Jake Morrison. They moved slowly across the barren landscape, scanning devices in hand, seemingly oblivious to the danger. "Someone contact Earth immediately," Vrel ordered. "Tell them to evacuate those people before." He didn't finish. The shadows around the landing site began to move. At first it looked like the rocks themselves were shifting. Then the true shape emerged, rising from a crevasse like a nightmare made solid. The Void Stalker stood 15 feet tall at the shoulder, its body covered in scales so black they seemed to absorb light itself. 6 eyes, glowing like molten gold, focused on the tiny humans below. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of crystalline teeth that could shear through battle armor like paper. The creature's long tail, covered in razor-sharp barbs, swept behind it, carving grooves in the solid rock. Every being in the council chamber leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable carnage. The Void Stalker took a step toward the humans. Then another. Its massive clawed feet left deep impressions in the ground. Tyler should have been running. He should have been screaming, firing weapons, calling for emergency extraction. Any sane being would have. Instead, he handed his scanner to Amy and stepped forward. "No," Vrel whispered. "No, you fool, what are you doing?" Tyler raised his hand slowly, palm facing outward in a gesture that meant nothing to the predator before him. Then he did something completely insane. He made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, like the noise someone might make to call a pet. The Void Stalker's enormous head tilted to one side. All 6 eyes focused on the human with what could only be described as curiosity. "He's going to die," the Taurusian representative muttered. "We're watching a human die." Tyler took another step forward. The gap between them closed to less than 10 feet. The Void Stalker could cover that distance in a fraction of a second. Its jaws could close around the human completely. But it didn't move. It just watched, head still tilted, as Tyler continued making those strange clicking sounds. Then Tyler did the unthinkable. He reached up, standing on his toes, and gently scratched the underside of the creature's jaw ridge. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates were shouting, some in horror, others in disbelief. Security officers reached for weapons that wouldn't do any good across light years of distance. Vrel's tentacles knotted themselves in distress. But on the screen, something impossible was happening. The Void Stalker's eyes half closed, a gesture that xenobiologists recognized as contentment in dozens of species. Its massive body relaxed. The barbed tail, which had been held rigid with tension, began to sway gently from side to side, carving lazy patterns in the air. Tyler was smiling. The humans could hear his voice crackling through the transmission. "There we go. Easy now. Nobody's here to hurt you, big guy." He continued scratching, and the Void Stalker actually leaned into the touch, its enormous weight shifting forward. Amy and Jake had their cameras out, recording everything with expressions of pure wonder on their faces. "Good boy," Tyler said softly, and the creature rumbled deep in its chest, a sound that shook the ground beneath their feet. In the council chamber, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They simply stared at the impossible scene unfolding before them. A human, barely reaching the creature's chest, was petting a Void Stalker like it was some kind of domestic animal. And the galaxy's most feared predator was enjoying it. Finally, a young Talarian delegate in the back found her voice. Did that human just make friends with a Void Stalker? Nobody had an answer. They could only watch as Tyler stepped back, gave the creature a respectful nod, and walked calmly back to his team. The Void Stalker watched him go, then settled onto the ground like a cat in a sunbeam, apparently content to observe these strange new visitors to its world. The council chamber looked like it was about to explode. Ambassador Vrel had turned a shade of purple that his species only displayed during extreme stress, and he was slamming 3 of his appendages on his podium so hard that the metal was denting. "This is madness," he shouted, his translator barely keeping up with his rapid speech. "Absolute madness. You humans have no regard for basic survival instincts." Earth's representative, Captain Diane Foster, stood at the human delegation platform looking completely unbothered by the chaos around her. She was a veteran diplomat, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she had the kind of calm expression that came from dealing with angry aliens on a daily basis. She waited patiently for the shouting to die down before speaking. "Ambassador Vrel, with all due respect, I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "Misunderstanding?" A delegate from the Carillion systems hissed, her forked tongue flicking in agitation. "We watched your people approach the most dangerous predator in known space and treat it like a household companion. 3 colonial expeditions were completely wiped out by those creatures. Thousands dead." Diane nodded slowly. "Yes, and we reviewed all the records from those incidents. Every single one. Do you know what we found?" She pulled up a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Footage began playing from the first colonial attempt on Kroth 7, dated 43 years prior. The colonists had arrived with massive terraforming equipment, armed escorts and defensive perimeters. The moment they detected Void Stalkers approaching, they opened fire with plasma cannons. "You shot first," Diane said simply. In every single encounter, the approaching party used weapons, established military formations, and treated the Void Stalkers as hostile targets before any actual aggression occurred. "They're predators," someone shouted from the upper galleries. "So we're wolves," Diane replied, and a new image appeared. It showed an ancient Earth painting of a wolf, fierce and wild. Then the image shifted to a modern photograph of a golden retriever puppy sleeping peacefully in a child's arms. 15,000 years ago, wolves were the apex predators of Earth. They hunted our ancestors. They killed our livestock. We had every reason to fear them. She walked slowly around the platform as she spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. But somewhere along the way, some brave or crazy human decided to try something different. Maybe they fed a wolf that looked hungry. Maybe they noticed that a lone wolf was actually just scared and lonely. We'll never know exactly how it started. But humans and wolves figured out that we were better as friends than enemies. Another image appeared, this time showing a massive tiger. We learned to respect tigers even though they're perfectly designed killing machines. We studied them, protected them, and yes, some humans even formed bonds with them. The image shifted to show a researcher sitting calmly beside a fully grown tiger, close enough to touch. The council members were muttering among themselves now, less angry but deeply confused. The concept seemed completely foreign to them. Diane continued, "Most species in this council evolved by either running away from their predators or developing weapons to destroy them. Humans did something different. We learned to understand them, to communicate with them, to see them not as monsters but as other intelligent beings trying to survive just like us." "But Void Stalkers aren't intelligent," Vrel protested, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "They're animals. Dangerous animals." "Are they?" Diane pulled up new footage, this time from Tyler's ongoing mission. The quality was much better now, recorded over several weeks. The images showed Tyler and his team living among a pack of 7 Void Stalkers. The humans had set up a small research camp, and the creatures had apparently accepted their presence. The council watched in fascination as the footage showed a Void Stalker bringing strange fruits to Amy, dropping them carefully at her feet. Another scene showed Jake teaching a younger Void Stalker to play fetch with a rock. The creature would bound away, grab the rock in its massive jaws and bring it back, its tail wagging exactly like an excited dog. "This is the part that should really interest you," Diane said, highlighting a particular segment. It showed Tyler sitting on the ground, drawing patterns in the sand with a stick. 3 Void Stalkers sat around him, watching intently. When Tyler drew a circle, the largest Void Stalker used its claw to draw a circle in response. Tyler drew a triangle. The creature paused, studied it, then carefully drew something similar. "They're learning," breathed a delegate from the Science Guild. "They're actually learning abstract concepts." "It gets better," Diane said. She showed footage from just 2 days ago. A juvenile Void Stalker had gotten its leg caught in a crevasse. The pack was agitated, unable to help. Tyler and Jake brought equipment from their ship and spent 6 hours carefully freeing the young creature. When they finally succeeded, the pack didn't attack. Instead, the mother approached Tyler slowly and pressed her massive head against his chest in what could only be described as gratitude. That evening, the pack had brought the humans food. Not as a threat, not as territorial marking, but as a gift. The chamber was completely silent now. Diane let the footage speak for itself for a long moment before continuing. Dr. Banks has documented over 40 distinct vocalizations used by void stalkers. They have different calls for danger, for food, for greeting, for mourning. Yes, mourning. When one of the older pack members died of natural causes last week, the others gathered around the body for hours, touching it gently with their snouts, making low sounds that our audio analysis suggests are expressions of grief. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as she could. You never asked what they were saying. You never tried to learn their language. You saw teeth and claws and assumed monster. Humans see teeth and claws and ask why. What are they protecting? What are they afraid of? What do they need? This is still dangerous, Vrel said, but his voice was uncertain now. Even if they're intelligent, they're still predators. Diane smiled slightly. Ambassador, humans are predators too. We have forward-facing eyes, we eat meat, our ancestors hunted in packs. The difference is we learned that being a predator doesn't mean you have to be a monster. Sometimes the scariest-looking creature is just protecting its family. Sometimes the deadliest hunter is also capable of incredible gentleness. You just have to be willing to see it. She closed the holographic display. Dr. Banks isn't being reckless. He's doing what humans have done for thousands of years. He's building a bridge between species. And maybe, just maybe, it's time the rest of the galaxy learned how to do the same. The footage from Croth 7 spread across the galactic network like wildfire. Within 48 hours, every inhabited world had seen the images of Tyler scratching the chin of a void stalker. The reaction was explosive, and the galaxy found itself divided in a way it hadn't been in centuries. On the industrial world of Paxtor Prime, the ruling council issued an immediate statement condemning humanity's actions as dangerous naivety that threatens the stability of established safety protocols. Their news feeds ran constant coverage showing the historical massacres caused by void stalkers, reminding everyone why these creatures had been classified as extermination-level threats. The message was clear: humans were fools playing with fire, and eventually they'd get burned. But something unexpected was happening among the younger generations. On Telos, a farming world that had struggled with Crimson Raptor attacks for generations, university students began gathering in the central plaza. They carried signs with images of Tyler and the Void Stalker, with captions reading, "What if we never tried to listen?" and "Fear is not the same as understanding." A young Talarian student named Kess spoke to the local news, her voice shaking but determined. "My grandfather died in a raptor attack when I was little. I was taught to hate them my whole life. But watching these humans made me think, what if the raptors are just hungry? What if they're just defending their territory like the Void Stalkers were? We never tried talking. We just started shooting." The protests grew. Within a week, 7 different worlds reported similar demonstrations, mostly led by young people who had grown up watching human entertainment broadcasts. They'd seen Earth's documentaries about saving endangered predators, videos of humans swimming with sharks, images of wildlife rehabilitators raising orphan bears. To them, the human approach didn't seem crazy. It seemed compassionate. The council was in chaos. Emergency sessions were called almost daily. Conservative factions demanded that humanity be banned from all wildlife preservation zones and restricted from first contact protocols. But the progressive voices were growing louder, asking questions that made the older delegates deeply uncomfortable. Back on Croth 7, Tyler and his team were completely unaware of the political firestorm they'd created. They were too busy making breakthrough after breakthrough. Amy had discovered that Void Stalkers had a complex trade system within their packs. The larger members would hunt, while the smaller, faster ones would scout and gather plant materials. They'd exchange resources based on need, not dominance. Jake documented their play behavior, which was remarkably similar to Earth's wolves. The younger Void Stalkers would wrestle with each other, learning hunting techniques in a safe environment. The adults would join in sometimes, always careful to not hurt the juveniles with their superior strength. It was family. It was culture. It was everything the galaxy had said was impossible for mindless beasts. Then the storm warning came. The research vessel's AI started blaring alerts at 3 a.m. Tyler bolted awake, pulling up the readings on his tablet. His blood went cold. A Class 5 stellar radiation burst was tearing through the system, headed straight for Croth 7. Impact in 12 minutes. Everyone up. Now, he shouted, running through the small research station. We need to get to the ship. Amy and Jake were scrambling into their suits when the AI delivered worse news. The ship's radiation shielding had a microfracture in the hull from landing. It must have happened when they touched down 3 months ago. The fracture was tiny, barely noticeable during normal operations, but during a Class 5 burst, it would be fatal. We can't stay in the ship, Jake said, his voice hollow. We'll cook inside it. They had 8 minutes now. The landscape outside offered no shelter, just flat volcanic rock for miles in every direction. The radiation would hit them in the open, and their suits would provide maybe 30 seconds of protection before catastrophic failure. Tyler looked out the window and saw them. The Void Stalkers were moving, all 7 of them, running in a direction they'd never gone before. The pack leader, the scarred female Tyler had named Duchess, stopped and looked back at the research station. She roared, a sound that shook the building's walls. She's calling us, Amy whispered. They had no choice. The 3 humans burst out of the station and ran after the pack. Duchess waited until they were close, then something incredible happened. She grabbed Tyler's jacket in her jaws as gently as a mother cat carries a kitten, and began to run. The other Void Stalkers each grabbed a human, their massive jaws carefully closed around fabric and equipment harnesses, never touching skin. They ran faster than any human could, covering ground in powerful leaps. The countdown in Tyler's helmet read 4 minutes. Then 3. The Void Stalkers reached a cliff face that Tyler had never noticed before, partially hidden by rock formations. There was an opening, a cave system that went deep into the planet's crust. The creatures carried them inside, moving through passages with practiced ease. They'd clearly known about this place all along. Deeper and deeper they went, until Tyler's radiation sensors finally started dropping. 2 minutes. 1 minute. 30 seconds. The Void Stalkers brought them to a vast underground chamber and gently set them down. Then the creatures did something that Tyler would never forget. They lay down in a circle around the 3 humans, their massive bodies forming a living shield. When radiation began seeping through cracks in the cave ceiling, the Void Stalkers positioned themselves to block it, taking the exposure themselves to protect the fragile humans in the center. The Galactic Council was watching all of this through the emergency beacon transmission. The footage was being broadcast live across every major network. Billions of beings watched as creatures that were supposed to be savage killers pressed their bodies against humans to share warmth. They watched a juvenile Void Stalker bring water that had pooled in a depression in the cave floor, carefully carrying it in its mouth to give to Amy. 27 hours the storm lasted. 27 hours of the galaxy watching these monsters care for 3 humans with a tenderness that most sapient species couldn't match. The Void Stalkers took turns keeping watch, brought food from deeper in the caves, and when Jake started showing signs of shock from fear and cold, Duchess curled completely around him, sharing her body heat. When the storm finally passed and the all-clear sounded, Tyler emerged from the caves with Duchess beside him. He wrapped his arms around her massive neck, his face pressed against her scales, and he just held on. The footage showed him crying, and Duchess making soft rumbling sounds that the translators picked up as something close to contentment. That image, that single moment of a human embracing a Void Stalker after being saved by it, became the most viewed piece of media in galactic history. 3 planetary governments collapsed within the week. Citizens demanded answers from leaders who had ordered extinction protocols. They wanted to know how many other species had been destroyed not because they were evil, but because they were misunderstood. The protests that had started with students now included entire populations. The galaxy would never be the same. The unmarked military transport dropped out of hyperspace without warning, its approach so sudden that Tyler's research vessel's alarms barely had time to activate. Amy rushed to the communications console, her heart racing as she pulled up the identification codes. "It's a VR1 military ship," she said, her voice tight with worry. "High command clearance. Tyler, whoever this is, they've got serious authority." Tyler exchanged glances with Jake. The political situation had been tense for weeks since the storm footage went viral. Half the galaxy wanted to give them medals, the other half wanted them arrested for violating safety protocols. An unannounced military visit could mean anything. The transport landed about 100 yards from their research station, smooth and professional. The hatch opened and a single figure emerged. He was VR1N, which meant he stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and scales that shifted between blue and gray. But what caught Tyler's attention was the uniform. The insignia marked him as an admiral, and the decorations covering his chest represented a career of distinguished service spanning decades. Duchess, who had been resting near the station, lifted her massive head and watched the newcomer with cautious interest. The other Void Stalkers positioned themselves protectively around the human camp but didn't approach. Tyler walked out to meet the Admiral, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. As he got closer, he could see the officer's face more clearly. The Admiral looked old even by VRNN standards. There were scars across his scales, the kind that came from ground combat, not ship battles. And his eyes held something Tyler recognized from his own father, a veteran of Earth's last border conflict. This was the look of someone carrying heavy memories. "Dr. Tyler Banks?" The Admiral's voice was surprisingly soft, his translator rendering the words with a gravelly quality. "That's me. And you are?" "Admiral Garrett Hayes." The name hit Tyler like a physical blow. Every student of xenobiology knew that name. Hayes was the hero of the Outer Rim, the brilliant strategist who had saved dozens of colonies from Voidstalker attacks 40 years ago. He was a legend, the kind of officer they named ships after. He was also the man who had ordered the orbital bombardment that killed thousands of Voidstalkers. Tyler felt his jaw tighten. "Admiral, I didn't expect to meet you under these circumstances." Hayes looked past Tyler toward Duchess and the other Voidstalkers. His expression was unreadable, but his secondary arms were trembling slightly. "I need to speak with them. The Stalkers. I need you to introduce me." "Sir, with respect, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Your history with their species." "I know my history, Dr. Banks." Hayes's voice cracked slightly. "I've lived with it every single day for 43 years. Please. I'm not here as an admiral. I'm here as someone who needs to make something right before he dies." There was something raw in the old soldier's voice that made Tyler pause. This wasn't a military operation or a political stunt. This was personal. "All right," Tyler said slowly. "But we do this carefully. And if they show any signs of aggression, you back off immediately." "Understood." Hayes nodded, and Tyler led him toward the research camp. As they walked, the Admiral began to speak, his words coming slowly, like each one cost him something. "I was 23 years old. Fresh out of the academy, assigned to a ground assault team on Kroth 7. We were told the Void Stalkers were animals, that they'd killed colonists without provocation, that extermination was the only option." He paused, his scales darkening with what Tyler had learned was a VRNN expression of shame. "We believed it because we wanted to. It was easier than questioning orders." They reached the camp and Hayes stopped walking. Duchess was watching them now, all 6 eyes focused on the Admiral with an intensity that would have terrified most beings. "The battle went badly," Hayes continued. "We were overconfident, poorly prepared. My unit got separated in a canyon system. I was injured, a piece of shrapnel through my side. I couldn't walk, couldn't even crawl. I was bleeding out on the rocks and my team had no idea where I was." Amy and Jake had come out of the station now, listening quietly. Even the younger Void Stalkers had stopped playing and were watching the scene with curious attention. "I heard it approaching before I saw it. Those heavy footsteps, the sound of claws on rock. I knew what it was. I thought I was dead." Hayes's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "It came around the corner and I looked up into those 6 eyes and I knew this was how I'd die. Eaten by a monster on a forgotten planet." Duchess took a step forward, her massive head tilting in that characteristic expression of curiosity. Hayes flinched but held his ground. "But it didn't kill me," he said. "It just stood there looking at me. Then it left. I thought maybe I wasn't worth the effort, that I looked too dead already. But it came back." His voice was shaking now. "It brought plants. The kind with water stored in their roots. It dropped them next to me close enough that I could reach them. Then it just stayed. It stayed with me for 2 days." Tyler felt chills running down his spine. Amy had her hand over her mouth. Other predators came. Smaller things, scavengers probably. The Void Stalker drove them off. It kept me alive until my rescue team found me. Hayes looked directly at Tyler now, and there were tears running down his scaled face. "I never reported it. Who would believe that a mindless killing machine had shown mercy? That it had protected me? So I kept quiet and I let everyone keep believing they were monsters." "Then what happened?" Tyler asked gently. "I got promoted. Rose through the ranks. And when the council designated Kroth 7 for complete purging, guess who they put in charge?" Hayes's laugh was bitter. "I gave the order. I sat in a command ship in orbit and authorized the bombardment that killed thousands of them. The creatures that saved my life, I burned them from the sky. And I told myself it was necessary, that it was duty, that I was protecting the colonies. Duchess was closer now, just 10 feet away. Her nostrils flared as she scented the air around Hayes, and Tyler realized she was analyzing him, reading his emotional state the way Voidstalkers had learned to do with the research team. "I've carried that for 43 years, Hayes said. "Every medal they gave me felt like a stone around my neck. Every speech about the Croth 7 victory made me want to scream the truth. But I was a coward. I stayed silent." He looked at Duchess, really looked at her. "Then I saw the footage of you and your team. I watched you trust them, and I watched them save you during the storm. And I realized that everything I did, every life I took, was because I was too afraid to tell one simple truth. They're not monsters. They never were. I was." The old admiral slowly dropped to his knees, his forearms spread wide in a Voronezh gesture of complete submission. "I can't undo what I did. I can't bring them back. But I needed to come here. I needed to look them in the eye and say I'm sorry. Even if they can't understand the words, even if it doesn't matter, I needed to say it." Duchess approached slowly, each step measured and careful. Tyler held his breath. The massive Voidstalker could kill Hayes in seconds if she chose to. She had every right to, given what his orders had done to her species. She stopped directly in front of the kneeling admiral. Her head lowered until it was level with his. 6 golden eyes stared into 2 gray ones. For a long moment nothing happened. Then Duchess did something that made Tyler's eyes water. She gently pressed her massive head against Hayes's chest, right over his heart. The admiral's arms came up slowly, trembling, and wrapped around her neck. And the old soldier, the decorated war hero, the man who had ordered the death of thousands, broke down completely. His sobs echoed across the volcanic plain as Duchess stayed perfectly still, accepting his grief and guilt with infinite patience. "I'm sorry," Hayes whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." Duchess rumbled softly, that same sound of comfort she made with the younger Voidstalkers when they were scared. Tyler realized that somehow, in ways humans and Voronezh couldn't fully understand, she knew. She understood regret. She understood remorse. And in her own way, she was offering forgiveness. 6 months after Admiral Hayes knelt before Duchess on the volcanic plains of Croth 7, the Galactic Council chamber looked different than it ever had before. The seats were packed, standing room only, with representatives from nearly every member world in attendance. This wasn't just another session. This was history being written in real time. Admiral Hayes stood at the central podium, his decorated uniform pristine, but his posture had changed. He stood differently now, less like a conquering hero and more like a man who had finally put down a burden he'd carried too long. His 4 hands rested calmly on the podium's surface as he looked out at the assembled delegates. "Honored members of the council," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I stand before you today not as a war hero, but as someone who made a terrible mistake and lived long enough to understand the cost of that mistake. I propose the establishment of the Croth 7 protocols, a new framework for how we approach species we don't understand." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ambassador Vrel, who had been one of the loudest critics of human involvement with Voidstalkers, leaned forward with interest. The political landscape had shifted dramatically in recent months, but there was still significant resistance to change. Hayes pulled up a holographic display showing a list of species currently classified as extermination-level threats across Council space. The list was longer than most people realized. 47 different species, spread across 32 worlds, all marked for complete elimination if they posed any threat to colonial interests. "Before any species on this list is engaged with lethal force, I propose that a human xenobiologist must be included in the first contact team," Hayes continued. "Not as the sole decision-maker, but as a voice that asks different questions than the rest of us have been trained to ask." A Carillion delegate stood abruptly. "You want us to risk human lives on every dangerous planet? That's madness, Admiral. Respectfully, humans may have gotten lucky with Voidstalkers, but that doesn't mean their approach works universally." Tyler stood from the human delegation section. He'd been asked to attend as an expert witness, though he felt more like an awkward spectator at his own trial. "Delegate, we're not saying our way is perfect. We're saying it's worth trying before jumping to extermination. Give us a chance to communicate first. If we fail, you've lost nothing. If we succeed, you've saved a potentially intelligent species." The debate raged for hours. Conservative factions argued about resource allocation, safety concerns, and the precedent it would set. Progressive voices countered with ethical obligations and the scientific value of preservation. But the tide had turned in ways that couldn't be ignored. The vote was called just before the day cycle ended. 247 in favor. 186 against. The Croth 7 protocols became official council policy. What happened next surprised even the optimists. Within 3 standard months, human xenobiologists were deployed to 7 different worlds with so-called dangerous megafauna. The results varied, but they were universally better than previous extermination campaigns. On Telos, Dr. Rachel Howard spent 6 weeks observing the crimson raptors that had terrorized farming communities for generations. She discovered they weren't attacking settlements out of aggression. They were defending nesting grounds that happened to be in mineral-rich soil, the exact same soil the colonists wanted for agriculture. Rachel brokered a relocation agreement. The colonists moved their farms 3 miles north, and in exchange they helped protect the nesting grounds from natural predators. Within a year, raptor attacks dropped to 0. On Pelix 9, a pair of researchers named Ben Torres and Lisa Kim made first contact with the Void WRMS, serpentine creatures that had destroyed mining operations with seemingly random violence. Except it wasn't random. Ben discovered the WRMS were sensitive to subsonic vibrations and the mining equipment was causing them excruciating pain. Once the mining companies adjusted their equipment frequencies, the WRMS not only stopped attacking, they started helping, using their natural tunneling abilities to reveal new mineral deposits in exchange for food offerings. The most shocking discovery came from a world called Hexus 3. Dr. James Park was studying creatures called shadow dancers, beings made of what appeared to be living darkness that had killed dozens of explorers. James realized they weren't attacking at all. They were trying to communicate. Shadow dancers existed partially in a different dimensional frequency, and physical contact with normal matter caused them pain. What looked like attacks were actually attempts to push explorers away from their nesting phases. James developed a light-based communication system, and within months, shadow dancers became the first non-technological species to engage in abstract mathematical exchanges with council scientists. 17 species were removed from the extermination list in the first year. 3 were being actively evaluated for provisional sapient status, which meant they might eventually have representation on the council itself. But the real test came when Tyler received an unexpected message. Duchess wanted to come to Earth. The request sent shockwaves through human government. Bringing a void stalker to humanity's homeworld was risky on every level. But Tyler argued passionately that refusing would undermine everything they'd worked for. If humans truly believed these creatures deserved respect and trust, they had to be willing to welcome them home. The day Duchess's transport landed outside Geneva, where the Human Council delegation was headquartered, over 1 million people gathered to watch. News drones filled the sky. Security forces were on maximum alert, though they'd been ordered to remain invisible. Duchess emerged from the transport with 2 other void stalkers, a younger male named Razor and an elder female called Nightshade. They moved slowly down the ramp, 6 eyes taking in the massive crowds, the towering buildings, the completely alien landscape of Earth. Tyler waited at the bottom, trying to look calm even though his heart was pounding. When Duchess reached him, she lowered her massive head and pressed it against his chest in their familiar greeting. The crowd erupted in cheers so loud that the void stalker's ears flattened momentarily. The visit to the council chamber was broadcast across every inhabited world. Duchess, Razor, and Nightshade were given positions on the main floor, their massive forms dwarfing the diplomatic platforms around them. Tyler stood with them, one hand resting on Duchess's shoulder. When it was his turn to speak, Tyler kept it simple. We didn't do anything magical here. Humans aren't special because we made friends with void stalkers. We're just the species that remembered something important. Our ancestors were prey once too. We were the ones hiding in caves, afraid of the dark, jumping at every sound. We survived by learning, by adapting, by figuring out which animals could hurt us and which ones could help us. He looked around the chamber, seeing the countless alien faces watching him. Every species in this room came from somewhere. You all had predators on your homeworlds. But at some point, you got smart enough and strong enough that you didn't have to be afraid anymore. And when that happened, you had a choice. You could wipe out everything that scared you, or you could learn to coexist with it. Maybe even learn to understand it. Duchess rumbled softly, and the chamber's translators picked it up. The sound came through as something between contentment and agreement. We're not saying don't be careful, Tyler continued. We're not saying every predator can be befriended. But we are saying that dangerous isn't the same as evil, and scary isn't the same as monster. Sometimes the thing with the biggest teeth is also capable of the biggest heart. You just have to be brave enough to look. A young Talarian journalist managed to get close enough to shout a question as Tyler left the chamber with the void stalkers. Dr. Banks, what's your secret? How do humans do this? Tyler paused, scratching behind Duchess's jaw ridge while her tail swayed happily. Around them, cameras captured the moment for the history archives. A human and a void stalker, comfortable and content in each other's presence. Proof that the impossible was just another word for, we haven't tried yet. Tyler grinned. Honestly? Patience, respect, and really good treats. Works on almost everything. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting the monster. It's taking the time to learn its name.